You described to us how you met Jim Sheridan. Now, this was the beginning of a real collaboration between you and Jim Sheridan. And to me, it seems to be also parallel in your life with a real affection for things Irish, for people Irish, for the culture Irish. Do you think that that began with the relationship with Jim Sheridan? Or do you think that your interest in Jim Sheridan and your interest in that story and In the Name of the Father and The Boxer, part of your trilogy of Irish films, do you think that they came out of what was there already?
Well, as much as I love Jim Sheridan and as much as he has been a great influence in my life, I couldn't really give him the credit for, for that too. It was really the other way around, because my father, I suppose I was probably 4 years old when I first went with my father, with my family, to the west of Ireland. He wasn't from the west, actually. He was from County Laois, which had been called Queen's County in the old days. And from an early age, we began to think of it as being a place that was, if not home, certainly as close to home, and perhaps something almost better than home, which was a sanctuary, a place that you could escape to and always find what you were looking for, a certain quietude. And I grew up in England, and I mean, I am by culture and education an Englishman, and I've never tried to deny it, but I suppose in some sense, and I might share this with a lot of people that work in the performing arts, I felt a sense of alienation within my own society. And something about the nature of the class system there appalled me, as it had done my parents too. And Ireland always beckoned throughout the years, and I was fairly confident that at some time I would move over there.
Your dad was a successful writer of detective stories and also a poet. But your grandfather started in the film industry when it was silent, 1922. And for 40 years, Michael Balcon, later Sir Michael Balcon, literally dominated the industry. He created Ealing Studios, where all those spectacular black and white films came from. When you were a little boy, was that where you were introduced to the movies, through your grandfather?
I wasn't really introduced to movies, Richard. I mean, I didn't know what my grandfather did until I was quite a bit older. When I discovered the Ealing comedies, it was quite a revelation to me, because my grandfather had long since retired from the business, and I grew very close to him after my father died, and grew to very, very fond of him. But as a young kid, he was quite an intimidating character, and I don't remember ever having many conversations with him. But really, I suppose the theatre was more of an influence through my mother, who had started out her life as an actress, and when she married my father, she more or less put that to one side, but still occasionally did things. And her father, my grandfather, was appalled when she became an actress. I mean, he thought it was the next thing to becoming a hooker, as far as he was concerned. It was like, you know, it was an absolutely unacceptable...
You're going on the stage.
Exactly.
My daughter was going on the stage.
I know, it was outrageous. So, well, that caused a storm in the house. But it was through my mum that I began to meet a few people. And I watched from the top window of our house as they rebuilt from the ground up a cinema that had been bombed during the war. And they built it into a theatre, which is now the Greenwich Theatre. And my mother always sort of made it clear to anyone that was working at the theatre that the house was open to them if they wanted to just come and relax and spend a bit of time there. And I got to meet some lovely people during that time.
One of the things I read that you wrote a long time ago is you said, as a youngster, I rather liked actors because I found them to be generous and warm-hearted people. Now you know actors. Do you still think that that's true?
Yes, I do.
You do?
Yes, I do.
Do you remember when you said to your folks, I think this is the career I've chosen, I think I want to go into theater, I want to be an actor?
I think I kind of kept it to myself for a while. I think it was more of a kind of private decision I made when I was around 12. But it seemed to be a decision made out of necessity, because at that time I was just really a layabout. And the only time I ever really used energy, it more or less got me into trouble of some kind or another. And like many people, the theatre seemed a forgiving trade. And my first boarding school that I was sent to, which was absolutely unforgiving in pretty much every respect, all the reprobates congregated in the art room. Not because we were artists, because there was just this tiny little corridor of liberty of some kind in that place. And so it began there, strangely, in this hugely restrictive environment where the world seemed pretty bleak because a boarding school is your world.
It's
Whatever
universe.
lies outside of it is eclipsed by the the day-to-day horror of and I was struggling. I mean, I was really struggling to keep my head above water. So the theatre seemed, you know, without knowing anything about it, the theatre seemed to be the life for me. Excuse me. And I had one moment, I suppose you could call it, as people often talk about defining moments, and mine would seem to have an unpromising aura to it, which was that I was given a bit part in a production of Cry the Beloved Country. Does that play mean anything to you? It's set in South
Splendid
Africa.
play, yeah. It was a play about the horrors of apartheid.
That's exactly right, yeah, you got it. And I was cast as a little black boy. Because, of course, woe betide that there should be any black children in this school. Or if they were hidden away in the East Wing or something. And so I had a tiny little T-shirt and a pair of skimpy shorts, and that meant that I had to cover my body in makeup and my face and wear a little wig. And the thing that I really loved about this, for that 2 hours a night, you walked onto a place that was flooded with light in an otherwise dark world, and it was as simple as that. Even from the very beginning, working in the theatre, I understood certain things about myself. And again, I'm very grateful for that, because it's not invariably true that you understand what it is that you need at an early stage, because there's so much. You're impelled to do so many things that go against the grain very often. Mm-hmm. You know it's going to be a tough life. And from my point of view, I assumed I was going to have a life in the theatre, because very few English actors at that time were getting a chance in movies. Much as I loved films, it never really occurred to me that that would be a part of my life. We all really thought we were going to work in the theatre and maybe do a bit of TV to pay the bills now and then. And the theatre world is very different. You know, the theatre world is not, you know, you may, I suppose, gain some recognition, but it's just not, it's not in the same, you know what I'm talking about, it's not to the same degree.
Well, because also in the theatre world, you go out and you play to 800 people.
Right.
Or 900 people a night. Here, a movie goes out and it's 10 million people.
And you're that big to most of them as well.
Yeah.
If they've got the cheap seats, you're like,
that's right.
Is that you need binoculars to see who you are? So, you know, and that was my early years were spent working in the theatre. I knew that the capacity to do this work was something it was a delicate thing. Whatever it was at one's very core that led one to do this work, I knew that it was not indestructible, and that if I kept putting myself in situations that made me uneasy, which could be doing work that I didn't believe in, even when I didn't have a choice in the matter, or having to hawk myself around, even auditions, this sounds like horribly arrogant, but open auditions. I did a couple of those for the RSC and the National, where you sit in a room with 50 other miserable actors working on a piece of Shakespeare, and then you walk into a room, there's 7 men all puffed up with self-importance, and you know, you strut around and they look at you like a specimen of some kind. And I ended